I'll see you guys next time. Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. First of all, I want to thank many of you who have signed up to Patreon. I think there were around 20 or 30 of you. One even signed up to the $35 tier. I really appreciate that. Someone actually left a comment on YouTube after yesterday's video saying, "You ghoul, all you want is money." And I find this ironic given the amount of free content I've put up. Compared to other creators, I'm not sure who's put up more free content than I have. I'm talking about the Crime Rocket blog, which is completely free, which is hundreds of posts in which a lot of other creators use to get their material, to get their photos, to get their content. That's all free. And of course the YouTube videos, also hundreds of them that are also free. So what I think some people don't know is that I'm a full-time true crime writer. I don't have another job. There was a time where I did photojournalism on the side and true crime writing, and then I eventually went full-on into true crime writing. Patreon is meant to supplement that, and I think you can understand after writing almost 100 books, it's something that I can't keep up. My health certainly won't allow it to sort of stay kind of chained to the keyboard. So Patreon is kind of a way that I can earn an income without sitting at the desk all day churning out books. So, what I think some people should bear in mind is if you have a job, let's say you work at a store, I don't think anybody comes up to you and says, "Wow, did you work in the store today? What a ghoul you are. All you want is money." When people work, they expect to get paid. When people do a lot of work, they expect to get paid. And the work I do, I just find a lot more meaning in, and so do a lot of other people. And people who disagree seem to feel either that you shouldn't earn any money or they're going to make it their business to make sure you don't. So it's just the way that I earn a living, and it was my choice, and Patreon is certainly helping me at a time when, like I say, I've decided to write fewer books. This year has definitely been a lower output year, although I've got a couple of books on the conveyor belt, including Silver Fox Post-Truth, Laurie Vello Cult Figure, probably a second book in the Boy Interrupted Letitia Stout series. And I'm hoping to bring out another book on Madeleine McCann, Beach of Light, quite soon. At the same time, I'm converting books already written into audiobook and paperback. At the moment, I'm working on the Two-Face series, currently uploading the Two Pollyannas book as audiobook on Patreon. That's on the $5 tier. So once again, I want to invite you to join Patreon. As I say, this series will stop in about 6 days' time, and will continue exclusively on Patreon on the $1 tier. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment. If you haven't joined Patreon, it is Patreon/TCRS, and you can join for as little as $1 a month. And there's a really nice group of people there. Okay, and so let's get started with today's episode. So today's episode is quite different for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's kind of a short entry. I think there are only 3 little entries in the Phone Datta review. Also, I'm going to be talking about something else that may be quite sort of controversial. Okay, so part of this is going to be dealing with the Phone Datta review. Something else is going to be dealing with another aspect which I think is quite misunderstood, and it's really got to do with Shanann's health. Did she have lupus? Why isn't lupus mentioned in the autopsy? Was Shanann as ill as she said at certain times? So 2 years ago today, on July 19th, Chris Watts added an unidentified contact to his phone. July 19th, 2 years ago, was a Thursday. It started off kind of as in the usual pattern. Watts called Shanann, presumably just prior to leaving for work. Okay, what is again different is Watts calling Shanann. It was usually the other way around. So this time he called her and they had a 10-minute conversation. Now, once again, what do you think that conversation was about? My guess is, and again, you've got to remember what is happening in the broader context. What happened the day before? What happened the day before that? What are the overarching narratives going on? So my guess is the conversation Watts had with Shanann had to do with where they were staying in Myrtle Beach, and what that was going to cost, and maybe just his thoughts on that. And Shanann was probably justifying why that was necessary. I'm not going to see your parents. You can go and see them on your own if you like, but you know, and maybe there was also some warm and fuzzy stuff between them, you know, where they're talking about that's where we met, that's where we can celebrate our anniversary. I think that's where they spent their honeymoon. So maybe that was sort of a little bit part of the fabric of conversation. But this is at 05:34 in the morning. Then approximately 5 hours later, so again, when Watts is at work, he called an unidentified contact, no name, no number, and held a 7-minute conversation. Now, who could that be? Any ideas? There are a couple of possibilities ranging from likely to unlikely. So a couple of possibilities are Trent Bolt. Could Watts have called Trent Bolt and spoken to him for 7 minutes? Could Watts have called Amanda McMahon? Or could he have called someone else? Someone who he later removed that information. Could it just be a random sort of person? Could he have called someone maybe at Myrtle Beach? Could he have called someone at Vivint? Could he have called Kessinger's office number or something like that? Who would he have likely have called? So there's a little bit of mystery around this particular call. And whether it's related or not, we can't be absolutely certain. But around about 10 hours after this, a little bit less than that, at 20:35, 25 to 9 that evening, Watts logged onto Facebook. So this is the second time, I think, in a row that he does this. And what that seems to indicate is that he is disturbed by something. It's either he's been told by his family what Shanann's been saying about them, or he's thinking about what could Kessinger possibly know. Could Kessinger be seeing things on Facebook and then asking him about it, and then he's going onto Facebook to see, wow, just how much shit could I possibly be if Kessinger is stalking Shanann on Facebook? So it could be either of those. It could also be both of those. Was he reviewing what Shanann had said? Shanann may have told him, this is what I said about your parents. I didn't say anything that wasn't true, and maybe put a particular spin on it. He then went and checked, if one wants to put it that way. He went to go and see it firsthand. It's unfortunate during the several hours Watts was interrogated, he wasn't specifically shown the phone data review and asked to explain it, and whether he could recall someone or some of these interactions. What was disclosed or discussed in those numerous conversations between him and his wife? It's something I've said before. Who was this unidentified contact? What was he doing on Facebook and on the 20th Snapchat? So the very next entry in the phone data review is really, really interesting. I was considering dealing with it in this episode, but I think it deserves its own episode, so we'll deal with that tomorrow on the 20th. So something else just to mention is 2 years ago today, Shanann posted this photo of herself, and she's wearing the shirt, I think that says something about her being pregnant, but you can't quite see it in that particular image. Now, if you put yourself in Nicole Kessinger's shoes and you imagine Kessinger's looking at these images, then it's easy to look at this image and say, yeah, well, there's Shanann talking about, she's wearing another shirt showing that she's pregnant. But be careful of cognitive bias. So because you're coming at the story right at the end and you were told right in the beginning that Shanann was pregnant, that informs your perspective throughout, right? So it's very easy to assume and to project that onto the whole case, to say, well, obviously you would have known from the beginning that Shanann was pregnant. But if you know how affairs are conducted, there's a lot of wheeling and dealing, deceits, deceptions, and so on. And we don't quite know how Kessinger would have truly felt about that. I kind of get the feeling she wouldn't take a lot of crap. She wouldn't sort of want to deal with a lot of that kind of thing, especially based on the previous relationship she was in. She did want to be number one. On the other hand, if you just look purely at the photos of Shanann is somewhere else. She's in North Carolina. She's putting up photos of herself looking happy, right? And what kind of message is that sending to a mistress who wants to feel like she can step in her place, take her place? It seems to be that the wife of this person is somewhere else and happy wherever she is. She's not missing her husband. There are no messages in those posts saying, I miss Chris, or I'm thinking about Chris, or Chris and I are blah, blah, blah about the baby. They're all messages kind of about herself and the children. Does that make sense? Also, as I've said earlier, if you look at those pictures, not all of them are clearly showing that she's having a child, although some of them are. There is a photo saying, I'm creating a tiny human, what have you done today? And Shanann's looking happy. That photo also appears to be taken, well, I'm not actually sure where that particular one was taken. That one probably was taken in Colorado. There's another one in front of the house. All I wanted was a back rub, and Shanann looks quite happy there. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Kessinger saw this and was confused. So you had a baby and then you went to North Carolina. Or maybe Watts told her that there was a guy in North Carolina. I don't know. We don't know. Kessinger may also feel that if she says what she was told, no one would think that she believed it herself or something like that. Do you know what I mean? If she says what actually happened, people wouldn't believe her. People wouldn't believe it is true. There's also the picture, oops, we did it again. That was a picture that was a profile picture for a long time. And the question is, did Kessinger know that this picture was taken in their kitchen? And why on earth would Shanann take this picture and it was in their kitchen? Did Kessinger confront what's on this particular picture? The other thing is, if Chris Watts told Kessinger, wow, my wife has been going nuts on Facebook over Nutgate, maybe that made Kessinger curious, and she then went onto Facebook herself. And then Watts realized his mistake, that he'd actually misspoken, that he was now directing Kessinger's attention to that. And maybe that kind of started causing him to panic, because maybe she started saying to him, I saw this, what's going on there? What about this? What about that? What if my friends see this? And of course, all of this would have been straightened out and we would have found out for sure in a court case. If this went to court, we would have known exactly what the situation was. It's kind of a lingering mystery. You can make up your mind what you think happened, but some of it, I think, is certainly subjective, where what you're thinking happened is likely for you in your situation. It's quite difficult to see what was likely for them in their situation. And this is why I say the fact that you are on Facebook all the time and you maybe go into other people's profiles all the time, does that mean Kissinger would? And on the one hand, you might say, yes, any woman would be curious and would go into Facebook. But I can tell you, I'm not on Facebook, and I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook since I've not been on Facebook. In fact, I spend very, very little time on it. So it's hard to imagine you not doing something when you're doing it all the time. So my argument is just that Kissinger probably did go on Facebook, but not constantly and not as often as a lot of people think. And given that, is it possible through the noise of Thrive that she didn't have a clear idea what was going on the way many of us do? Okay, and that really concludes today's analysis on the 19th of July, 2 years ago today. To sort of conclude the day, I guess one could say Thursday was leading to the weekend. Watts at this point had 4 precious weekends in July when he had the space to conduct the affair. That's in terms of July. And then it was really over. Then it was going to North Carolina, and then when he got back, he would have the children. So Watts had just July really to enjoy his honeymoon effectively with Kissinger. 4 weekends. He had to make each one count because they might be his last with his mistress. And I think each one was better than the last. And as we're going to see, the last 2 weekends were pretty memorable. Some weekends weren't that great. For example, the visits to his home around the 4th and the 14th, the 4th of July, I think they had an impact on those weekends. There was a little bit of arguing in the first 2 weekends, and the last 2 weekends, I think, was quite a special time, even for Kissinger. And you can hear her being quite breathless and sounding quite smitten herself when they're at the sand dunes. And we're going to get to that in due course. But I think there's a interesting dynamic that was emerging here, which was as things were getting worse with Shanann, I'm talking about Nutgate, them being away. I don't want to spend, when you come here, I don't want to spend the holiday with your parents. As things were getting worse with Shanann, including with his close family. Bear in mind, why is he going to North Carolina? Isn't it for a family reunion? And now it's going to be him spending only time kind of with Shanann and to some extent her father and of course his children. But it's kind of pointless for him to go all the way to North Carolina where his family are and not see them and not be able to see them, right? So that's the one aspect I wanted to talk about. I just want to briefly mention something else. Now, in the photo of Shanann on the 19th, she basically says, running errands with 2 wild kiddos, thriving, #thriving. And that's kind of her message, is that I'm thriving, I'm happy, I'm exactly where I want to be. And like I said earlier, can you imagine if Kissinger was seeing this, how she's reading it? She's thriving, she's happy. She's away from her husband and she's happy. And maybe Chris Watts would have emphasized that. Yes, she's in North Carolina. Maybe she wants to continue living there. She's decided to move there. Who knows what lies he told her. But it would be quite easy to believe that Shanann meant to leave him permanently based on her leaving him for 5 weeks prior to that with the children. Can you see what I'm saying? Can you see how that could be his story? But the thing that I want to sort of emphasize here is this idea that Shanann is thriving while Nutgate is kind of going on. the wild kiddos are thriving while it's in the middle of Nutgate when Cece apparently almost dies. She's so fragile, her health is so fragile, if she eats a nut she could die. But Shanann's thriving, but they are thriving. So that's quite far from the picture of wellness. Revealing her younger daughter has significant health challenges of her own, and they apparently extremely serious. They're life-threatening. So if you go back to the Facebook post Shanann put up on Nutgate, she refers to something called EOE. And what that refers to, if you go and check it up, is eosinophilic esophagitis. Let me try that again. Eosinophilic esophagitis. Okay? Then you can go and Google that if you like. It's EOSINOPHILIC, right? Eosinophilic, and then ESOPHAGITIS, or esophagitis, or just Google EOE. And that, as well as asthma, are conditions that are both highly correlated to lupus. And that this is what Cece was suffering from. This is something Shanann is saying in relation to Nutgate that Cece is suffering from, and that her health is fragile, and so people have got to be careful because it's a life-threatening situation. The fact is, these conditions are highly correlated to lupus. In other words, Cece inherited her serious health challenges from her mother. And I think Shanann was totally justified in being a bit resistant or reluctant to have a third child, because she was seeing, I think Bella had some health problems herself, asthma being one of them. But then in Cece, the health things were far more significant. So I think it was justified in thinking, wow, do I really want a third child? Not just because of the demands that Cece was placing on Shanann in terms of just the second child, but also the health demands. And this, I think, shows what a crazy and kind of idiotic person Watts was, that he thought, oh, let's just have a third child, maybe that'll fix our relationship. It's kind of a fragmented way of thinking, that, oh, I'll just have another child and that'll fix everything. That's magical thinking in its own. In the case of EOE, the leading symptoms include dysphagia, which is difficulty swallowing, and ironically enough, this is the medical term, failure to thrive. That's actually a symptom of EOE, failure to thrive. Now think about this whole thing of, you have a child and they've got this serious illness, which they've possibly inherited, and one of the key classic symptoms is failure to thrive, that the child just can't find its way to health and wellness. And here's a product promoting itself as Thrive. Use this product and you will thrive. Is that why Thrive meant so much more to Shanann than the other MLM promoters? Was she taking the message to heart, literally? Was she confusing the semantics of a medical diagnosis she'd heard throughout her own life with one now potentially associated with one of her children? Just something to think about. The other thing to think about is Shanann had been this is if you believe that Shanann had health challenges. I do believe she did. Some of them may have been psychosomatic, but some of them certainly, I believe, were real. And if you believe that, then it means when Shanann grew up, she was more anxious than other people because of her health. If you have serious health problems, you are anxious. You're anxious about death, right? And also she was aware of, you can't always have what you want because you're ill, right? And what Thrive taught her was that you can. You've suffered through a lot of your life already. You've been denied things because of your illness. You can't spend time in the sun. You can't eat these foods. You can't do this. You can't do that. But what does Thrive say? You can have whatever you want. If you use these magical products, almost like Jack and the Beanstalk, if you use this bean, it's going to create this beanstalk that links you to a magical kingdom, and there's a treasure up there that you can have. With Thrive, if you take these pills and patches and powders, it's going to create a magical beanstalk that is going to link you to wealth and wellness beyond your wildest dreams. It's not a case of you can't always have what you want. It's a case of maybe you can have everything. Maybe you can have it all. So I think at the same time Shanann was painfully aware of it, she really didn't want someone telling her that she couldn't have it. Least of all, her sort of quiet, reserved husband's mother. In a way, her quiet, reserved husband was allowing her to have whatever she wanted because of the kind of guy he was, because he was an introvert, because he allowed himself to be dominated and controlled. But now his mother is saying, you can't always have what you want. I think Shanann resented that, but I think part of that resentment was that there's a ring of truth to that. I think all of us know there's a ring of truth to that in many situations. So my question to you guys is, what do you think about Shanann's lupus? Do you think it was a factor? Do you think it was all imagined? Do you think that because it's not mentioned in the autopsy, it actually didn't exist? Bear in mind, lupus is to some extent like cancer. This is something I've studied up on. I don't presume to be an expert, but I think there's a similarity between cancer going into remission. So in other words, if someone dies and they did have cancer before but they're in remission and they have an autopsy, no cancer could theoretically be found because it's in remission at the time of death, even though the person previously did have cancer. Obviously, if they had very serious cancer, some of the scars and evidence might remain there. But I think lupus is the same, that lupus can be very severe, but it can also go into remission. And it appears that it may have been in remission at the time of Shanann's death. On the other hand, it also could be behind a veil of information that is, for whatever reason, hasn't been released as part of the autopsy. We do know that there is a supplement to the autopsy that we don't have access to. I have an idea what could possibly be in that supplement, but I'm not going to talk about it right here, right now. I'll talk about it as we go closer to the events of August, the beginning of August and the end of August. Bear in mind, it is part of the narrative. I'm not sure how to really put this, whether to say it's part of the mainstream narrative or not, but it's certainly part of the narrative as I understand it, that the moment Chris Watts arrived in North Carolina, he tried to bring about a miscarriage. Now, I believe that. And I also believe that he tried again just before Shanann left for Arizona, and I think there's a lot of evidence to support that. But if that's true, then where is that evidence in terms of the autopsy? And the question is either, well, the evidence naturally dissipated or didn't happen to begin with, or that's part of the autopsy, the supplement that is being withheld. Maybe that was part of the plea deal. Maybe it's got to do with those HIPAA laws, those HIPAA secrecy laws. And that is what makes this case quite deceptive. It is in some ways incredibly simple and straightforward, in the same way that Chris Watts is simple and straightforward. It is in some ways very much what you see is what you get. And then in some very weird ways, it is there's just what you'd expect to see, you just don't see. For example, the cadaver dog traces are frustratingly mixed. The crime scene in the Watts home is frustratingly insignificant or without features. There's seemingly nothing there. There doesn't seem to be any kind of disturbance. The autopsy evidence is also frustratingly like vanilla. It's just there's nothing that really stands out, or not much that really stands out. And yet when you start peeling back the surface, you do see other things. Of course, some people want to see demons and like a whole host of what do you call it? Not accessories. You know what I mean? Like an accessory or other people involved. You don't want to peel it back that far, but because there's so much that we know and so much that we don't know, there's so much that can be spun one way or the other. And I think one needs true crime rocket science to tell the reality from the fiction, because we're not getting the full story from Chris Watts. We're getting a little glimpse at what he wants us to know, and then there's a lot that he doesn't want us to know. And it's because he doesn't want people to think well of him, or at least the minimum bad version of him that he's prepared to share. Because once he's nailed his colors to a mast, he's got to sit with it, and he actually is. The question is, this year, will he come forward and talk about what really, quote, really happened? Will someone else come forward and tell us what, quote, what really happened? And I think one's got to use a kind of scientific, logical, rational reasoning to look at the kind of person that he really is. That's the key, is look at the kind of person he really is, and then look at the dynamics and the context and all the details, and then find a way of putting all the pieces of the puzzle together in a way that fits, not forcing them. And that's why I think if you start off with a narcissism narrative, you're going to get lost very, very quickly. That's why I say you've got to start with an introvert narrative. The last thought I want to leave you with is actually from a fellow called Paul on Patreon, who left the following comment. And I think if you keep an open mind, it's going to really open up your thinking in terms of the Watts case in a kind of an unusual way. I think they call it lateral thinking. And there's a quote from Paul. He left this comment in the last couple of minutes, I think. 2 hours ago. So this was left 2 hours ago. I'm just quoting from Paul's comment. He says, I've been doing research on neural pathways in the brain, and it's interesting, but most of the emotional problems we face as adults relate back to using old pathways we used as children. The only way we can forge new pathways is to overcome the old ones by challenging ourselves every day. New pathways have to be reinforced regularly, then one day we revert to that pathway in times of crisis. The old ones are still there. They lie dormant like some old subway line that has been built over. This is why occasionally we can all show signs of narcissism or sociopathy. These conditions relate to our behavior when we were children, and every now and then the perfect storm of conditions come together that forces down those old neural pathways. And before we know it, we are back in the playground. He goes on to write, this got me thinking, does anyone remember playing families in primary school? I remember when I was about 7, being dragged around the playground by a girl. She was pretending to be my wife, and I was the husband. I didn't really do anything, but she did all the talking and bossing about. My friends were also dragged into the game, and they were also reluctantly dragged about as husbands, placed in various parts of the playground, awaiting further instruction. Every so often the boys would suddenly realize that this was unnecessary and then would break free and go crazy. The girls would be chasing us about, shouting at us to get back into the pretend homes, and sometimes we would destroy the made-up homes out of rebellion. My point here is that this isn't a million miles away from what happened in the Watts home. I believe Shanann and Chris had low emotional intelligence. Chris surpassed a lot of emotion, but when the shit hit the fan, I think he reverted to child neural pathway lines. Chris's rebellion, in my opinion, was the result of him accessing emotional neural pathways he hadn't had access to for a long time, possibly never. He may have actually been forging new ones, which, because he had a lot of catching up to do, were naturally childlike. I think it's a fantastic comment, and my response to it is basically that I think Chris Watts is building new pathways in his relationship with Kessinger. With Kessinger, he was feeling, I can be myself with her. I think she felt the same way with him, but I think he felt to a large extent, I don't have to be afraid of what I say to Kessinger. I can be myself, and I can kind of grow into my own skin, and I can just be comfortable with who I am. But I think in that, Chris Watts was also, he was finding a new side to himself. And I think part of that new side to himself was the killer Chris Watts, was something that he would never normally do. When he was with Kessinger, I think a brazenness was creeping into his gameplay. I think the affair was also something he would never do, but it made him brazen. And so I think the murder was just as brazen. Does that make sense? I think I agree with Paul in that after the murder, Chris Watts just reverted to type. He went back to being the cowardly, introverted loser, basically, the guy who just has no game to even field a court case, just basically said, where do I sign? Let me admit to all the charges and let me go to jail and serve my time. He was used to taking orders, and that's what he did. At the end, the little brief glimpse he had of this other life was via Kessinger, who said, you would be yourself. And unfortunately, part of the way Chris Watts imagined being himself was wiping out his family. That was also Chris showing his true colors, and unfortunately those were his true colors. It was bringing about a nightmare on other people in order that he could have his fairy tale. Okay, and that's it for today. Thank you for listening. We will carry on with the next episode tomorrow, the 20th. You can go and read that so long if you can't wait on crimerocket2.com, along with all the other days. All of that's free to read if you're interested. Bear in mind, this series will move to Patreon on the 25th. There were some people complaining about it moving. Well, it's not moving right now. It's moving on the 25th. So you've still got a couple of days to enjoy or make up your mind about migrating to Patreon. On Patreon right now, I'm uploading an audiobook, Two-Face, Two Pollyannas. It's book 3 in the 9-part series. Today I'll also be uploading TCRS reviews, and in this case it's the Dateline documentary dealing with Laurie Vallow. There've already been 3 big analysis episodes, each one around about an hour long, and there's been quite a lot of discussion about that. So today's episode also promises to be quite special. So if you're interested in the Laurie Vallow case, that's another reason to head on to Patreon. That's on the $2 tier. The audiobook is on the $5 tier. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please do, and I'll see you guys next time.